Okay, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be diving deep into personal boundaries.
Yeah.
It's a pretty fundamental topic, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's one of those things that comes up all the time, like, how to actually live a healthy and fulfilling life, right?
Right. And we've got this really interesting book here broken up into like parts. It's going to
Yeah.
be our main guide.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is really pull out like the core stuff, right? What boundaries actually are, why they're so important,
Hmm.
and like how you can actually develop some good, strong boundaries
Exactly.
without getting lost in a bunch of, self-help mumbo jumbo.
Yeah. That's the goal,
Yeah.
right? Practical understanding, getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this stuff actually works in your everyday life.
Exactly, exactly. And this isn't just about theory or concepts. This book gets into how boundaries affect every single part of your life.
Every single part.
Family, friendships, marriage, kids, your work, even your relationship with yourself.
And even your relationship with, something bigger than yourself.
Oh, right. I always forget to mention that part.
Yeah.
And it gets into common problems people have with boundaries, how we learn to do them, what can mess that up,
Hmm.
some big ideas, what the book calls laws, and, how people resist boundaries, how you yourself resist boundaries.
All that good stuff.
Right, right. And how to figure out if you're actually making progress with this whole boundary thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here.
There is a lot. And it asks some really interesting questions too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what does it actually feel like to live with no boundaries? Are boundaries like walls that shut everyone out, or are they something else?
Hmm. But what does it even mean to have boundaries?
Right. What's the wisdom from a spiritual angle?
Yeah.
Why is saying no so hard sometimes?
Tell me about it.
What happens when you're always trying to save other people from their own messes?
Mhm.
And then, how does our childhood shape how we do boundaries as grown-ups?
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot to think about. But it's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah. So, okay, first things first. People toss the word boundaries around a lot, but what are we really talking about here? Like at the most basic level.
I mean, most people probably have some idea, right? Like, boundaries are about where you stop and someone else starts.
Right,
It's
right.
like that property line thing.
Yeah.
Our book actually uses that same analogy, which I think is super helpful.
Oh, like a fence?
Yeah, exactly. But here's a super important point. Boundaries aren't meant to be these big solid walls that keep everyone out.
Okay.
It's more like they're these filters. They let connection in, but they also protect you from things that could hurt you or just drain your energy.
Filters. I like that. Like, some things can pass through and some things can't.
Exactly.
Makes sense. So it's not about building a fortress and hiding inside.
Nope, not at all.
Now, I thought this was interesting. The book talks about how boundaries aren't just some like psychobabble thing. It's saying they're rooted in something bigger, something, spiritual. What's that all about?
Well, it's this idea that God himself, how he's described, gives us this foundational understanding of boundaries.
Okay.
The book talks about God being separate, distinct,
Mm.
and self-responsible. He expresses his thoughts, feelings, all that, and it draws a line.
Right. So it's like built in.
Built in.
Yes.
And by being separate, and taking responsibility for himself, it sets up these principles of separateness and self-responsibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not like anti-spiritual to have boundaries.
Right.
It's actually in line with how things are supposed to work?
Exactly.
And the book goes on about how words are really important for setting boundaries.
Yes.
Especially one tiny but powerful word.
The word no. That's
Yeah.
where it's at.
Right. It seems so simple.
It does.
But why is that word no so important, and why is it so hard to say?
You hit the nail on the head. No is powerful because it tells people you're not just an extension of them. You have your own will, your own control over yourself. It's basically saying, this is me and that's you.
Yeah.
And I think the book even mentions some, spiritual texts about how important clear communication is. And no is part of that, right? It's about saying what's okay and what's not okay.
Right. And it's not about being mean.
No, not at all.
It's about love, about loving yourself enough to say no when you need to.
Exactly. It's about setting those limits with love.
Right, with love. Now, the book gets specific about what parts of you these boundaries are supposed to protect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It basically says that your feelings, your actions, your choices, your talents, even your thoughts.
Even thoughts.
Even your thoughts, all of that is your responsibility.
So it's like saying, this is my emotional space, my stuff to figure out, my decisions to make, my gifts to use, and my own headspace.
Precisely. And you get to decide how those things are treated by others.
Okay, so we've got an idea of what boundaries are, but what does it actually look like when someone doesn't have good boundaries?
The book uses this example of Sherry. Her day starts with this feeling of dread, you know.
Hmm.
She's got this unexpected meeting about her son, and she's just not looking forward to it.
Ugh, those surprise
The
meetings.
worst, right?
And then her mom just shows up uninvited, totally messes up her plans.
Yeah, and she ends up feeling guilty, like it's her fault her mom's there.
So already a rough start.
And it just keeps going.
Tell me about it.
Phyllis, from Church Calls, needs help right this second. Sherry's already overwhelmed, but she can't say no.
Of course not.
Then the neighbor shows up, his sprinklers are messed up, and somehow Sherry ends up feeling responsible for making him happy.
It's like everyone else's problems are suddenly her problems.
Right, and it's exhausting.
So if you're listening and you relate to Sherry, what are some red flags, some signs that you might have some boundary issues?
Feeling pulled in a million directions, like all the time.
Yep, that's one. Lying to avoid confrontation. Even if it's little white lies. Always putting other people's needs before your own and feeling resentful about it.
Right, because you never get to your own stuff.
Yes, exactly. And then, always getting interrupted, your plans always changing because someone else needs something.
It sounds draining, and it makes me think of this important point the book makes about responsibility.
Oh, yeah, that's key.
The difference between being responsible to others and responsible for others. What's the distinction there?
This is huge. Like, it can really change how you see boundaries. We are responsible to others, right? Like, we should care for each other, help each other out,
Okay.
but we're not responsible for other people. We can't control them.
So I can support my friend, but I can't make their choices for them.
Exactly. And it's so easy to fall into that trap, trying to control people, trying to make them do things our way.
So true. Now, the book talks about different patterns, like different ways that people mess up boundaries. What are some of the most common ones? Well, there's the compliance. They can't say no to save their lives. They kind of just merge with whoever they're with, go along with everything.
Yeah, the people pleasers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the controllers. They're the ones who hate hearing no.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to get their way either by being aggressive or by being super manipulative.
Like that Tom Sawyer character, getting people to paint the fence for him.
Yep, classic controller. And then there are the non-responsives. They just don't want to help anyone. It's like they hate needing help themselves, so they project that onto everyone else.
Interesting.
Oh, and the book talks about these two different types of boundaries too, functional and relational.
Okay, what are those?
Functional are like your ability to just get things done, manage your time, be responsible. Relational are all about being honest and standing up for yourself in relationships. Like, being able to tell your friend you're not okay with something. The book uses the Bible story of Martha and Mary to kind of illustrate this.
Mm-hmm.
Martha's all about getting stuff done, while Mary's more focused on just being present with Jesus.
Right, right. So we don't just suddenly know how to do boundaries, do we?
No.
It's something we develop, right? How does that happen?
Well, the book talks a lot about how important supportive relationships are with God and with other people.
Okay.
That's where good boundaries come from.
Yeah.
And then it gets into how kids develop a sense of themselves,
Like how they figure out they're separate people.
Exactly. There's this process called separation individuation.
Okay.
First, you have the hatching phase. That's when babies start realizing they're not just an extension of mom,
They're their own little person.
Right. Then there's practicing. That's when they get mobile, start exploring, and they're all like, I can do it myself.
That's when they get into everything.
Exactly. And this is where parents come in, setting firm limits, but not crushing the kid's spirit. Think about when a toddler's learning to walk. They venture out on their own, but they need those physical boundaries, like a safe play area.
Right, so they don't wander into the street or something.
Exactly. Then you have the rapprochement phase. That's when kids start realizing they can't actually do everything themselves.
Reality sets in.
Right. And this is also when they start using no effectively, like a real verbal boundary.
So they're figuring out how to assert themselves?
Yes. But it's so important for parents to make the kid feel safe, to say no, like they're not going to lose love or connection if they disagree.
Right. Otherwise, they might learn to just say yes to everything.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's adolescence. That's when boundaries get tested and reevaluated all over again.
Teenagers.
Yep. Lots of boundary work to do during those years.
So this whole development process can go wrong, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of the things that can mess kids up and make it harder for them to set boundaries as adults?
Well, for starters, parents who criticize their kids every time they try to assert themselves.
So the kid never learns to speak up.
Right. And then there's hostility. Some parents are just hostile to their kids' needs, which can either make the kid super compliant or super rebellious.
Two extremes.
Totally. And then over-controlling parents. They don't give their kids any space to breathe, to make their own choices.
So the kid never develops a sense of independence.
Right. And then there's the opposite. No limits, no connection. Like the kid throws a tantrum in the store and the parent just gives in.
Because they just can't handle it.
Exactly. So the kid learns that being aggressive gets results. The book also talks about how things like alcoholism in a family can really mess up boundaries.
Yeah, because it's so unpredictable. The
Again-
kid never knows what to expect.
Right. The book gives this example of Jerry, who had a really abusive mom. And because of that, he grew up always giving in to other people's demands, even in his romantic relationships.
So he never learned to protect himself.
Sadly, no.
Now, the book brings up this idea called the law of sowing and reaping.
Oh, yeah.
What's that about, and how does it connect to boundaries?
Well, it's this basic idea. You reap what you sow. If you do good things will probably happen. If you do bad things will probably happen.
Karma.
Kind of, yeah. But the book says the problem is when we keep rescuing people from the consequences of their actions.
Like enabling them.
Exactly. It uses the example of a parent always bailing out their adult kid financially.
Yeah.
Like always covering their overdrafts.
So the kid never has to face the music.
Right. And then they never learn to be responsible.
Yeah.
It's like we're actually disempowering them by constantly rescuing them.
It's like we're robbing them of the opportunity to grow and learn.
Exactly. And the book ties this into codependency, where people kind of hurt themselves by always trying to fix everyone else.
So they never focus on their own stuff.
Right.
Okay, so the book lays out these 10 laws of boundaries. We don't have time to go through all of them, but can you hit some of the highlights?
Sure. The law of responsibility is the most important one, I think.
Okay, what's that about?
It basically says that you might not be able to change everything overnight,
Right.
but you can start by admitting you have a problem with boundaries, getting help if you need it, figuring out your own internal boundaries, stopping bad behaviors, and dealing with those old childhood wounds.
So it's about taking ownership.
Exactly. Then there's the law of respect. This one is all about dealing with the fear of what people will think. Like, oh, they won't like me if I say no.
Right. That's a big one.
Huge. But the book says you need to focus on what you need, what your limits are, not on trying to control what other people think.
So being true to yourself.
Exactly. And the book tells this story of Stan, who was trying so hard to love everyone that he ended up depressed.
Wow.
He had zero self-respect in his boundaries. And then the book makes this important distinction between hurt and harm.
Okay, I'm curious. What's the difference?
Hurt is like someone might feel bad when you set a boundary. Harm is the damage that happens when you don't have boundaries.
Gotcha. Hurt is temporary. Harm can last a long time.
Exactly.
What other laws stand out?
Well, the law of motivation. That's about why we say yes to things.
Okay. Why do we?
The book says a good, healthy yes comes from love, from actually wanting to do something, not from fear or guilt or feeling obligated.
That makes sense.
Then there's the law of evaluation. That's about realizing that setting boundaries isn't just a one-time thing. You have to keep checking in, seeing how those boundaries are working for you and for the people in your life. And it's also about remembering that boundaries are necessary for living a life that's true to yourself.
So it's a process, not a destination.
Exactly.
What else?
Okay, the law of proactivity. This one says that we need to be proactive about setting boundaries. Not just reacting when someone violates them, but actually deciding what we stand for and what our limits are.
Taking control.
Right. Then there's the law of envy.
What's that one about?
Well, it says that people who don't have good boundaries often end up feeling empty and envious of others. And the antidote to that is taking responsibility and actually setting those boundaries.
So it's not about begrudging other people's success.
No.
It's about creating your own success by setting those limits.
Exactly. The law of activity reminds us that we have to be active in setting boundaries. We can't just sit back and expect things to change on their own. And then there's the law of exposure. This one is all about communication.
Great. Clear communication.
Yes. No hinting, no manipulating, just being straightforward about what your boundaries are.
Okay, so those are some of the big laws. Now let's talk about some of the myths about boundaries. What are some of the most common misconceptions people have?
Well, one big one is that setting boundaries is selfish.
Oh, I hear that one all the time.
Right. But the book says that it's actually the opposite. Boundaries are about taking care of yourself so you can actually give to others in a healthy way. It's like good stewardship.
Makes sense.
Another myth is that having boundaries means you're disobedient or unloving, especially in religious contexts. But the book argues that if you can't say no, then your yes loses its meaning. It might not even be a real yes at all.
So you're not actually giving from a genuine place.
Right. Then there's this fear that setting boundaries will hurt other people.
Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people.
It is, but the book assures us that you're not responsible for other people's feelings. They might feel bad, but you're not doing anything wrong by setting a limit. It also clarifies that boundaries don't cause anger in other people. It's more like the anger was already there, and the boundary just brings it to the surface.
Interesting. So it's like the anger is their issue, not yours.
Exactly.
What other myths are out there?
Well, there's the idea that other people will be harmed by your boundaries.
Yeah.
But the book points out that it's actually the violation of boundaries, especially in childhood, that's really harmful. It talks about this guy, Robert, who was left alone a lot as a kid. And that really messed him up.
So it's not the boundaries themselves that cause harm, but the lack of them.
Right. And then the book brings up the golden rule, treat other people's boundaries the way you want yours to be treated.
It's about respect.
Exactly.
What about the myth that setting boundaries makes you feel guilty?
Yeah, a lot of people struggle with that. But the book makes a distinction between genuine gratitude and manipulation.
Explain that one.
So it's good to feel grateful when someone does something nice for you, right?
Right.
But some people use guilt to manipulate you. Like they give to get. They expect something in return.
So it's about recognizing the difference between a genuine gift and a manipulation tactic.
Exactly.
Now, even when you understand all this, actually setting boundaries can be tough.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What kind of resistance do people face from others and from themselves?
Well, from others, you can expect some anger.
Oh, definitely.
People don't like it when they can't get their way. And a lot of times that anger is just a sign that they have their own boundary issues.
Like they're not used to people saying no to them.
Right. And then there's guilt tripping.
Oh, yeah.
People will try to make you feel bad for setting a boundary. But the book emphasizes that guilt is your problem, not theirs. You don't need to over-explain or apologize constantly.
Just have to stand your ground.
Exactly. It tells this story about Brian, whose dad actually cut him off financially when he started setting boundaries.
Wow, that's intense.
It was. But in the long run, it gave Brian the freedom he needed.
And what about setting boundaries with people who genuinely need help? That can be tricky.
Yeah, it can be tough. But the book says you have to recognize your own limits. You can't help everyone all the time. You'll burn out. Now, as for internal resistance, a lot of it comes from unresolved grief and loss. Sometimes we cling to unhealthy relationships because we're afraid to let go of something that was never really there.
Like holding on to a fantasy.
Exactly. The book talks about Jane, who always wanted a loving relationship with her dad, even though he was never really there for her.
So she kept trying to force something that wasn't real.
Right. And that kept her stuck.
So how do you overcome that kind of internal resistance?
The book gives some good advice. First, you have to admit you have a problem with boundaries. Then figure out what you're afraid of. What's holding you back? Get support from people you trust, pray, develop your own strengths and talents, and start practicing setting small boundaries in safe situations.
Like baby steps.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say you're working on your boundaries. How do you know if you're making progress? How do you measure success?
The book says that success isn't about whether other people like your boundaries.
It's not about pleasing everyone.
Nope. It's about how you feel inside. Do you feel less controlled by others, less resentful, less guilty, less like a victim?
Those are good signs.
And do you feel more loved, more loving, more peaceful, more in control of your own life?
Those are even better signs.
Right. And there's some practical things too.
Like what?
Can you say no without feeling super guilty? Are you managing your time better? Are you taking responsibility for your own actions and feelings? Are you resolving conflicts in a healthier way?
Those are good indicators.
And it helps to have relationships with other people who have good boundaries.
So you can learn from them.
Exactly. The book says it's really important to identify what's valuable to you, like your time, your energy, your money, your beliefs, and then decide how you want those things to be treated and how you don't want them to be treated.
That makes sense.
And it encourages people to start small, like practice saying no to little things, just to build up your confidence.
Yeah.
It also acknowledges that it's normal to feel guilty at first when you start setting boundaries. You're breaking old patterns, and that can be uncomfortable. But that guilt will fade as you start experiencing the freedom that comes with having good boundaries.
So it's worth pushing through the discomfort.
Absolutely. The book basically says that setting boundaries is a key part of growing up and being a mature person. It allows you to love more genuinely and be more productive in every area of your life. It even tells this story about Jan and Ben, whose marriage completely transformed after Jan started setting boundaries.
So it's not just about you, it's about your relationships too.
Exactly.
Now, the book revisits the example of Sherry, that woman who was totally overwhelmed.
Right.
But this time, she's got healthy boundaries in place. What's different?
Well, first of all, her mornings go much smoother because her family's sharing the load. And when Phyllis calls with that last-minute request, Sherry's able to say, hey, I can't do it right now, but how about this time?
So she's standing up for herself, but also offering a solution.
Exactly. At work, she delegates tasks effectively, trusting her assistant to do their job. And even the meeting about her son is something she approaches as a team with her husband.
So she's not carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore.
Right. And the overall feeling is so different. She's calmer, more grateful, and her marriage is way healthier. It's like a complete 180 from that stressed out, resentful Sherry we saw before.
It's amazing how much of a difference boundaries can make.
Truly amazing.
So as we wrap this up, what's the big takeaway? Why are boundaries so important?
The book says it's about freedom. It quotes Galatians 5:1, which says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free."
Freedom from what?
Freedom from being controlled by other people.
Okay. So it's about being your own person.
Exactly. And the book says that freedom, responsibility, and love, they're all connected. You can't have healthy relationships without all three.
I see.
It also talks about how important honesty and appropriate distance are, especially in difficult relationships.
Sometimes you have to step back to protect yourself.
Right. And it emphasizes how good boundaries in childhood really set kids up for a better future.
So it's not just about us, it's about the next generation too.
Exactly.
Okay, so here's the big picture. This deep dive has shown us that personal boundaries are not just a nice idea, they're essential for a good life. They're not about being selfish or pushing people away. They're about respecting yourself and taking care of yourself so you can actually show up for others in a healthy way.
Well said.
Remember the difference between being responsible to others and being responsible for others. That's huge. And don't forget the power of no. You have a right to say it.
It's a beautiful word.
It really is. And let's let people experience the consequences of their actions. It's how they learn and grow. And finally, remember that you need supportive relationships to help you build and maintain those boundaries. Okay, now for the big question. What area of your life needs better boundaries? Your relationships, work, maybe just your own well-being?
Take a minute and think about it.
And what's one tiny step you can take this week to start defining and protecting those boundaries? Maybe practice saying no to something small. And think about which of those myths about boundaries might be holding you back. Because when you set boundaries, you're not just saying no, you're saying yes to a better life.
A freer life, a more authentic life.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into personal boundaries. We'll see you next time. Okay, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be diving deep into personal boundaries.
Yeah.
It's a pretty fundamental topic, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's one of those things that comes up all the time, like, how to actually live a healthy and fulfilling life, right?
Right. And we've got this really interesting book here broken up into like parts. It's going to be our main guide,
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is really pull out like the core stuff, right? What boundaries actually are, why they're so important, and like how you can actually develop some good, strong boundaries.
Exactly.
Without getting lost in a bunch of, self-help mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Practical understanding, getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this stuff actually works in your everyday life.
Exactly, exactly. And this isn't just about theory or concepts. This book gets into how boundaries affect every single part of your life.
Every single part.
Family, friendships, marriage, kids, your work, even your relationship with yourself.
And even your relationship with, something bigger than yourself.
Oh, right. I always forget to mention that part.
Yeah.
And it gets into common problems people have with boundaries, how we learn to do them,